So on April 10th, 1912, a massive ship was set to sail from the port in Southampton, Europe, and it was heading towards New York. At the time, it was probably the biggest, if not the most luxurious ship to set sail. Unfortunately, there was a last-minute decision by the management company, and they changed the second officer, David Blair, with Charles Lightoller, a more experienced officer. And in his hurry to leave the ship, David Blair forgot to give the keys to an equipment locker to Charles Lightoller, and Charles Lightoller forgot to ask for them. The ship set sail, and for 4 days, it was a very smooth journey. But at around 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, the lookout all the way on the top of the ship, Officer Frederick Fleet, from the crow's nest, he spotted something. He spotted a massive iceberg, so he alerted the captain immediately. The captain immediately shut off the engines. He asked the crew to maneuver the ship away, but there wasn't enough time for them to move. And we all know what happened. That night, the Titanic sank, and nearly 1,500 people lost their lives. Now, the officer who spotted the iceberg in Frederick Fleet, he survived that night. And in his testimony, he shared that on that ship, the crew was not given binoculars. Typically, on these voyages, the crew is given binoculars. But he said that night, none of the crew had their binoculars. And he was asked that, why didn't you have it? And he said they weren't given. And where do you think those binoculars were? The management company, when they made a switch for the officers, and David Blair walked off with the keys in his pocket, he took the keys to the binocular equipment box. And so they didn't have their binoculars. He says that if they had them that night, they might have been able to spot the iceberg much sooner, and they could have averted the crisis. Let's pause this story and move on to the next one. In 2014, a documentary was released named The Man Who Saved the World. And it tells the story of Mr. Stanislav Petrov, a Russian military officer in the 1980s. And this was a time when political tension between Russia and the United States was at an all-time high. But one night, in September of 1983, he was on the night shift. And it was his job to monitor the defense radar system. And he noticed in that moment that there were 5 nuclear missiles headed towards them from the United States. Now, he was faced with a critical decision. In that moment, as per protocol, he's supposed to report this immediately to his superiors. His superiors would have escalated it to their superiors, and Russia probably would have retaliated. They would have launched their missiles, then the United States probably would have retaliated again, launching more missiles. Other countries might get involved, and millions of people might have died. Or maybe this was a false alarm. So Mr. Petrov thought for a moment. He thought that if the United States wanted to attack us, why would they only send 5 missiles? Wouldn't they send a lot more? And so in that moment, he made the decision to break protocol. He decided to break protocol when in the Soviet Union, that could mean losing your job or even losing your life. But his decision paid off. When he reset his system, he found out that it was a false alarm on the system, and the satellite thought that some reflections from the sun were actually missiles. So he averted this entire nuclear crisis. So what's common in these two stories? They might seem very different, but in both stories, the final outcome can be traced back to a particular decision made at a crucial moment. In one story, the management company for the Titanic decided to switch officers. And Whether they knew it or not, it led to the worst shipwreck in human history. On the other hand, a very calculated and careful decision was made by a military officer. And whether he knew it or not, he saved the lives of millions of people. So these stories go to show that the decisions that someone makes, the decisions that we make, they have an impact, whether we know it or not. And our life could be smooth sailing. We might have a pair of binoculars, and with the right pair of binoculars, we can foresee and predict many choices that we have to make. If I'm a student in school and I know I have a test, then I can make the choice to study so that I get a good grade. If I'm in college and I need to get a job, then I can make the choice to build my resume early, apply for internships, and do other activities so that I get the job I want. If I'm working, and I know I need to buy a house soon, then I can make smart financial choices so that I can save money. So sometimes there are many choices that we can foresee. But unfortunately, life doesn't always give us these binoculars. Sometimes we don't know if we're headed towards an iceberg. Sometimes we have to make a decision at a crucial moment without knowing what's going to happen or how it's going to impact me. In fact, we might be making decisions today that on a daily basis that without knowing how that could impact us in the future. That could be how I spend my time, how I choose to spend my time, who I choose to spend my time with, the media or the content that I choose to consume, where I choose to live or work. So our life is full of these decisions, and these decisions ultimately influence who we become in the future. So are there decisions that I can make today, or are there choices that I can avoid making today that can help me 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, or 30 years in the future?